From men earning wages by rapping on bedroom windows before dawn to children weaving between thunderous bowling balls for pocket change, these jobs were pretty common in Old Britain. Then, within a single lifetime, they became obsolete. Today, we look at 14 of these jobs that vanished without a trace. Let me take you back. First up, we have the rag and bone man. You see, long before recycling bins appeared at the curb, Britain relied on the rag and bone man. He announced his arrival by a familiar call echoing between terraced houses. Behind him rolled a horse and cart piled with the unwanted remnants of everyday life. From worn coats, broken chairs, twisted metal, and cracked pots. Payment rarely came as coins alone. Children would trade old rags for balloons, goldfish, or small toys. However, when consumer culture rose and councils took over waste collection, the calls faded along with the trade that once stitched neighborhoods together. But while the rag and bone man dealt with discarded objects, another worker carried something far heavier and far more essential on his back. Then, when winter tightened its grip, survival arrived on a man's back. Enter the coalman. This is the guy that hauled heavy sacks through narrow ginnels and ice yards, delivering warmth itself to Britain's homes. Coal dust coated everything, from boots, skin, and even breath. Cuts never quite healed cleanly and left dark marks where soot settled permanently. Every delivery mattered, and a missed sack meant a freezing night. Then, as the age of gas and electricity quietly creeped in, this job went out, and the coalman's footsteps faded from the frost. And once the fire was lit, something else had to make sure that fire didn't turn deadly. Chimney sweeps still climbed ladders long after the worst Victorian practices were gone. No children sent upward now. In their place were long brushes, rods, and practiced hands. Soot fell in thick clouds, coating hearths and boots alike. Needless to say, the work was unpleasant, but necessary. A blocked chimney could kill a household silently, but these sweeps were already there to save the day. But as open fires vanished and cleaner heating took over, chimneys fell quiet, and a job once revered gradually came to an end. As homes grew safer, attention shifted outside to the streets themselves. And every evening, the lamplighter made his rounds. Flame followed him as he lit the street lamp by lamp. Then, at dawn, he would return to snuff it out again. He knew which lamps misbehaved and which needed coaxing. But as modern electricity replaced traditional lighting, the profession ended. The streets stayed bright, but one of the most notable professions had gone missing. Yet, not all workers stayed above ground. Some made their living where sunlight never reached. Enter the tosher. By use of candlelight and instinct alone, these men waded through foul water in the city's sewers, searching for whatever the current might surrender. We're talking about lost coin, scraps of metal, and anything that could be sold above ground. For many, this hidden world offered a living when no other work could be found. Entire livelihoods depended on what the city unknowingly flushed away. Then, sanitation improved, tunnels were sealed, and the underground fell silent once more, taking away with it a job that many in Britain perceived as ordinary. Back above ground, a very different sound once defined entire neighborhoods. At street level, the steady whir of a grinding wheel once echoed through neighborhoods. The scissors grinder arrived with a cart and stone, setting up at the curve to breathe new life into tired tools such as kitchen knives, garden shears, and tailor scissors. But as factories churned out cheap replacements and convenience took over, the grinder's trade quietly slipped out of daily life. And while some crafts vanished from the street, others disappeared behind closed doors. Elsewhere, behind newsroom doors and print shop walls, linotype operators stood over hulking machines that melted metal into words. Each line of text was cast in hot lead, letter by letter, and locked into place with speed and precision. The air always smelled of oil and ink as machines clattered without rest. Then, as screens arrived, These machines that once thundered through the night cooled for the last time, taking with them a craft few would ever truly understand again. But not all vanished jobs were clean or technical. Some dealt with the filthiest realities of city life. And long before pest control companies or disinfectants arrived, the streets of Britain were patrolled by the rat catcher. These guys were armed with traps, terriers, and an uncanny knowledge of where vermin hid. Some even turned their catches into small spectacles by trading rats to curious buyers or showing them off at fairs. Yet, when sanitation improved and poisons became common, the calls of the rat catcher faded. With that, the alleys became quieter, but not entirely free from memory. Still, rats weren't the only unpleasant thing people were paid to collect. Elsewhere, the Purefinder performed a task that sounds almost unbelievable today. Imagine collecting dog feces from streets and kennels. They would then deliver it to tanneries where it was used in the tanning process to soften leather. The work was malodorous, unpleasant, and endlessly demanding. Their knowledge of which streets and homes offered the richest finds was highly prized. Unfortunately, as chemical substitutes emerged and leather production adopted modern practices, these collectors were no longer needed. But even animal waste wasn't the end of Britain's strange recycling economy. Even the bones of animals, once discarded without thought, found their way into industrious hands. And with that came the profession of bone pickers. They scoured rubbish heaps, gardens, and slaughterhouses as they gathered fragments that would be ground for glue, soap, or fertilizer. Then, as factory-produced alternatives emerged and municipal waste systems expanded, the bone picker's craft disappeared, leaving only faint traces of a trade that once kept industry turning. Yet there was one form of waste even more vital and far more dangerous to remove. We also cannot forget about the night soilmen, who were also known as gong farmers. While the city slept, these workers descended into privies and cesspits and removed human waste by hand. The stench was pervasive and the danger was equally real, yet their role was vital for public health. Their presence was announced by lanterns bobbing along narrow streets. Then came modern plumbing and sanitation solutions, which made their work irrelevant. As cities modernized, new jobs emerged, ones built not on muscle, but on voice and wires. Before smartphones became the order of the day and calls connected automatically, the telephone exchange operator ruled the lines. Here, women sat for hours in front of vast switchboards as they connected conversations across the city. The rules governing this profession were strict. Every woman had to be well-spoken and unmarried. They were often required to resign from their posts upon marriage. As years went by, lines were silent, plugs were removed, and an era of unseen guardians of conversation came to an end. But outside public exchanges, communication had its own specialists. Within businesses and hotels, a different kind of telephone mastery existed. Switchboard girls handled internal communications by guiding calls to offices, departments, or guest rooms. Each day brought hundreds of calls, sometimes secrets, sometimes trivial requests, all routed without error. Then, as technology took over, electronic switchboards began rendering this profession obsolete. In just a few years, a profession that once held communication lines in institutions and facilities dwindled into oblivion. And while these jobs faded quietly, one final role vanished with noise, danger, and flying wood. Meanwhile, in the noisy bowling alleys, another unsung workforce risked life and limb for a few pennies. Pin setters, often teenage boys, would leap onto narrow ledges above the wooden lanes, gather fallen pins and replace them with lightning speed, all while balls thundered past inches away. The work was grueling, dangerous. Regardless, it was eagerly sought after for tips and a taste of financial independence it promised. But just like the other jobs we have looked into, the clang of machines changed everything. Automatic pin setters replaced the quick-footed youth, and the lanes eventually fell silent of hurried footsteps. These lost British professions remind us how much daily life once depended on skill, sweat, and human connection. The work may be gone, but the stories remain. If this trip down history moved you, remember to subscribe to the channel and share more jobs that I might have left out in the comments.